was no icons, there was nobody there you could look up to.
Friends of mine were being beat up a lot.
If you were in any way openly identified, it would be hard to get a drink in Derry.
We don't talk about that sort of thing here.
You have 24 hours to get out of the town, or you're dead.
If you talked about women's rights, you were striding, upsetting everybody.
You expect people to walk down that street with you. That's all right, you can go home, but they'll then be identified.
It was very much about raising awareness and raising support. The community became a lot stronger.
It was amazing the amount of young people. They would not have been out the door.
I was born about 200 yards away from my present address in the old Roswell Street, where they built the high flats. I was very much into fashion from a young boy, so I wanted St. Colum's College uniform. I ended up with a Christian Brothers tech and a black leather strap across my fucking hands for everything I did wrong, so it didn't suit me and what I wanted to be.
I grew up in a farm in a rural area, yeah, and my father was a farmer, and I liked working on the farm. And we were from a nationalist, Catholic background, and I learned a good lot about politics growing up. I remember very strongly we had to agitate hard to get housing because we needed housing. I knew that we didn't live in an equal society.
I was born in 1951 in a small village outside Blackpool in Lancashire called Carlton, and had a very idyllic childhood actually. The whole concept of homosexuality was never entered my mind. It just was never talked about. I had this concept that there was something wrong with the way I was, but I hadn't an idea what it was.
I suppose I always knew I was gay, probably from maybe 10 or 11, even when I didn't know what the word meant, but I knew there was something there. There was no icons, there was nobody there you could look up to or whatever. You maybe seen gay life, as it was called then. It happened in America, it happened in London, but I didn't even know it existed in Derry if there was anybody else like it.
I was born in Killigordon in 1968. I lived there until the age of 14. My parents split up when I was 13, 14, so before that I kind of had an inkling that I was gay. Well, I knew it was different, and when you're like 10, 11, 12, you're not really sure what's going on.
I grew up in Dublin, and I was the eldest of 9 children in Dublin, typical Dublin working class family. We were also utterly ignorant about sexual matters, including, I think, my parents. It wasn't until I think I was probably about 20 or something like that before anything actually happened. And the strange thing was that as a teenager, I had worked in what was then the only and the most famous gay bar in Dublin called Bartley John's. But again, and there were all sorts of, very effeminate people and outrageous people who would be there. But again, I didn't connect in any way with that. That wasn't what I was.
My sister and my mother moved to Omagh when we were 15, I think, and we were in Omagh for about 10 years. So it was really in Omagh where I kind of realised that I was obviously a queer woman, a gay woman. But at that time as well, you would have known I was a dyke because I always had really short hair and wore the Doc Martens and everything. So. And in Omagh again, it was like living in Killigordon. There was no such thing as anybody being gay. It was never talked about, and there was a lot of friends of mine who had been beat up a lot, and there would have been, and myself would have been beat up in Omagh as well, purely because of how we looked, and so there was a lot of that stuff would have went on.
I went to secondary school. It was all boys, and I think every year there was a boy in my class that I thought was gorgeous, but still it never impinged upon me that, I was gay. But because I wasn't particularly tough, I did get picked on, especially in sort of middle years when I was about 3rd year. I had a lot of experience, a lot of bullying.
Being gay at that time was not something that was talked about freely in the city. And if it was mentioned, the word queer, faggot or stuff like that there was mentioned, never in a positive way.
The hard nuts at school would beat you up or warn you off or something. And my friend, he's now dead actually, was Raymond McDade. We used to go down to the bakery on Lecky Road and get 2 snowballs or 2 tarts and give them to the boys that threatened us, and we never got touched.
I was fortunate enough to get the 11 plus, and I was sent to boarding school in Derry, Thornhill, a girls only school, and I was good at school, and I remember that in the 60s, starting, I was always interested in politics and social affairs and current affairs. So there was also how are women being treated, how are we being treated? And we were certainly being treated as second-class citizens. We weren't being taken seriously or weren't being looked upon as having important things to say, except for Bernadette Devlin. Bernadette was a kind of a very outspoken person.
When I was a child, it was illegal to be a gay man in Northern Ireland. So if I was going to go out at 16 or 17 and have a relationship with someone, I could have a relationship with someone of the opposite sex. But if I had a relationship with someone of the same sex, I would have been breaking the law. The first time I knew there was maybe gay life in Derry, it was in a bookshop called Bookworm. And I remember seeing a Gay Times. And that was like something amazing. There's all our people here. There's all our people in the UK.
In 1967, I would have been 16, probably. Law reform came in England, decriminalisation of homosexuality. And I can remember this so distinctly. I was standing outside the school, waiting for the bus, and a boy came up to me and said, "Hey, Burkitt, you and Bromley are legal now." I thought, what was he talking about? I didn't understand. But they obviously had sussed that my friend Keith and I were gay. But neither of us had. At university, I made friends and I enjoyed life at university, but still hadn't quite twigged I was gay. The Queen visited the university, and there was a guy called Quentin Cheriton who was a very outrageous gay man, and he met the Queen. He walked up to her and said, "Hi, Queenie." And this was all over the university. Of course, everybody was scandalized by this. And I thought, what a scary person. Is that what gays are like? And that really scared me off quite a long time.
Then I worked in Burton's, which was a tailor shop in Ferricky Street, from 17 on. And then things changed because I bought suit upon suit with my discount. I ended up with 10 suits at the age of 20. And all these beautiful girls and beauty queens, when I think of it now, they asked me out. I didn't ask them out. But I was a good thing to have on their arm, I suppose, because I looked well. There wasn't a scene as such for gay people. Gay people went to Belfast or to Dublin. Because don't forget, there were gay saunas in Belfast then. A gay sauna.
I went to Derry in 1974. And that was still very early days in terms of modern gay liberation. But there was a kind of a folklore about, particularly gay men that would have gone back even to the time of the Second World War, when there were lots of Americans and, international people in Derry.
There was what we call a cruising area, and that would have been where a lot of the sex workers would have operated from, and mostly female. I remember going there just to see what this was like and walking through it. But it was always an area of town you were told not to go to. So I suppose then I wanted to go and see what it was like. And I went there probably maybe about 16. I remember meeting sex workers there, majority of being women. But there was 2 or 3 male sex workers there as well. For me, that was amazing, just to meet somebody else and talk to somebody. It was really so important. The sex workers were very supportive and very good. And then they had told me then that the bars that they were drinking in, there was other out gay people drinking in these bars. So that was really news to me. It was like something, God, there's gay people in Derry. I maybe thought maybe I'd been in Dublin, maybe in Belfast, but I didn't think it was happening in my own hometown.
You couldn't guarantee that the bars would be a friendly place for people. And in fact, I remember my friends being asked to leave bars in Derry back in the 70s, 80s, you know.
Because?
Because they were holding hands, or they went in with my gay friend of mine, Tarlick O'Neill. I think he put on some makeup one day and went into a bar and they asked him to leave, you know. And anybody holding hands or, you know, kissing in the bar who were, you know, two men. I don't know of any woman ever dared to do it. I never heard of that, but men were asked to leave, even just for holding hands, sometimes even just for sitting there chatting, you know.
You kind of just wanted to be invisible. You know, that way, just even in Oma, you'd be thinking, God, I hope nobody notices me walking down the street. Because you're constantly getting shouted at across the street. You know, and you were just hoping you'd get back to the house before you got bloody a slap or something, because that happened a lot. And it would have happened a lot in the clock bar as well. Especially me going into the toilets in the clock bar. My sister would have to come in with me because we'd like, these women would be in the toilets going, you're in the wrong toilets.
I myself was beaten up on at least 3 occasions, fairly brutally, and I mean that you were, there was always the risk if you were in any way identified, you know, you'd be thrown out of bars. That might be the kind of the least of your problems, but yeah, if you were in any way openly identified, it would be hard to get a drink in Derry, never mind anything else, and then, you know, if you were known, people would, you know, might follow you or whatever, and there was and you know, there was a kind of an atmosphere as well generated. I mean, all the political parties now rush to show that they're all fully in favour of all these things, but that was not true in the 1980s. You know, there was a sort of a hint that, you know, being gay was somewhere not fully national, if you like. You know, there was a kind of a And indeed that phenomenon has been noticed all across particularly the post-colonial world. You know, that if you like, homosexuality has something to do with the kind of the upper classes, and usually the colonial upper classes. So there was a phenomenon of that in Northern Ireland as well, certainly in Derry, I think, in nationalist Derry.
One night after, they called it the Stardust, which was in Abbey Street, and I was well jarred, and a fellow was well jarred, and we were out in the street sitting in the pad, and I said, do you want to come back to my house? I had feelings. I knew I had feelings, but I didn't know what had happened. So we brought them back. My mother and father were in bed. We were no sooner in the flat, and we were up in the clothes off each other before we got the living room. But that went off all right. The following day I was at work, and I got a phone call, just a phone call, saying, you're Brian McDermott. I says, yes, I am. You have 24 hours to get out of the town or you're dead. Well, I never took it in. I went blank. I panicked. It was the Troubles. It was close to the time the girl was painting tarred in the Bogside and tied against the lamppost.
For what?
Because she had actually dated a British soldier. During the conversation, you queer get out of town. You have 24 hours to get out of town. I didn't know what a queer was. I still didn't understand it. I was still hurting very badly. I ended up in Jersey and the Channel Islands.
Me and Martin's mothers were two best friends. We have never known each other to be apart. We've always been together forever. And it was just by a stroke of good luck we both happened to be gay. And we had two fabulous mothers who took care of us, embraced us. If you were gay and defined yourself as gay and you wanted to locate and find other people that were gay, you had to go to Foyle Street, which is not the same street it is today. It was a very dingy place. So Martin has talked all week about safe spaces. So we had none. And we had to place ourselves in, which we thought we were big men. We can deal with it. We'll manage it, we're okay. We don't need mummy, we don't need no one. But when I reflect upon it, we were 17, and Martin, being the younger, was 16. We placed ourselves in grave danger. That is where we went. We went to danger. We walked towards the fling. We weren't there to sell ourselves, we weren't prostitutes, we weren't that. We were just there to meet other young gay men in a very desperate situation, in a sad place. A place where there was prostitutes, and let me say about those ladies, and I do not know what took them there individually, but they were very caring and protective of us young gay men, and very lovely. And they were very delighted to have a male presence that was not exploitative of them and also would look after them. But very often they looked after us. So that was the environment and the world in which me and Martin came out. And that is why Martin endeavours and continues to endeavour and will always continue to endeavour. And I'm actually quite delighted that he invited me along to back up his endeavours, that we must never allow any young person to ever go to a red light district, to ever put themselves in that position.
In those days, it was common for men, for instance, who might have suspected they were gay or had kind of different feeling, they still got married. Many of them maybe with some sort of hope that marriage would change them. And indeed the church, I know myself, that the church priests, for instance, of the Catholic Church, and I'm sure this was true of the other denominations as well, they would tell gay men, get married, a good woman will sort you out. I mean, the attitudes to women, apart from anything else.
The church was more or less saying, you could be gay, but don't do the act. And I think everybody, because we'd grown up in such strong faith families, we still wanted to have our faith, and we thought then, right, we'll go in here, it's okay if we're gay, but we'll just not do the act. So a lot of people took on that board, tried to go into the religion and tried to keep to that lifestyle, but human nature sometimes took over then. And then a lot of my friends around my age left the priesthood.
I know myself that growing up, and you had these weird feelings, and you knew you were a bit different from other boys around you, and that this people often confuse this with what Catholics called vocation, that they were somehow or other separate and chosen, all these kinds of things. And I know I don't know what the percentage, for instance, of gay Catholic priests are. I suspect it's very high. What I do know, and I can absolutely stand over, is that every single person that I know who entered the Catholic, that I knew personally, that entered the Catholic Church, went for the priesthood, every single one of them was gay, and sometimes very actively gay.
I mean, women left Derry, or women got into a relationship, and then they stayed in that relationship, and they were obviously closeted, so they didn't want knowing about it. There was a lot of learning in those years. And I was coming out as a lesbian in that time too. Through 1977 and 1978, I was just teaching part-time in the Northwest Regional College, and I wanted to change. I wanted to become active and do something that would be meaningful, because there was a lot of community action here in Derry. There was a organisation that ran 45 Clarendon Street, Paddy Doherty's organisation, and that later, developed into, there was the Derry Youth and Community Workshop, I think, was developed out of there, and Community Mirror, Cavan ran Community Mirror out of there. And so we used that for a place for a lot of discussion around issues about what we could do for change in the 6 counties. And the issue, we always raised the issue for women as well by that time.
I think it was about 1976. There was some article in the Derry Journal that really infuriated me. The point that was being made was that, the homosexual people couldn't be trusted in any way, and they weren't truly Irish, and they weren't patriotic and all that sort of thing. Anyway, I was infuriated by this, and I wrote a letter back saying at least 2 of the people executed during the Easter Rising had been homosexual, Roger Casement and Pearse. So that actually set in train a kind of a string of letters backwards and forwards. And I have to say the Derry Journal was not very supportive, but a few people then contacted me, and out of that, I began to, if you like, acquire gay friends. I was a lecturer at Magee, so I had a very privileged position. And I mean, I know from some of the staff, the senior administrative staff particularly, were not particularly happy that I was writing letters about these matters to the paper. But the privileged position of a lecturer in the university meant that, well, they couldn't get rid of me.
I applied for jobs in nature reserves, zoos, that sort of thing, but they all said, we need somebody with teaching experience. So I applied for Teachers Training College and did an extra year in Lancaster doing teachers training. Now, Quentin had actually done the same thing a year before, and he had been told in no uncertain terms that he couldn't be openly gay and be a teacher. So this Scottish job at this school in Scotland called Strabane Grammar School. So I applied for it, and they literally, by return of post, said, come for an interview. So I thought I'd better find out exactly where this Strabane is. I think it's somewhere up on the northwest coast of Scotland. That was Oban. I was mixed up with Oban. So I looked on a map. I thought, fuck, that's in Ireland. Then I thought, double checked, and it was. Well, you know, I've never been to Ireland. I might as well go and see what it's like. So I booked my ferry over, and my boyfriend was actually from Belfast, and he said, "What sort of school is it?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Is it Catholic or Protestant?" I said, "I don't know. It's a school." He says, "What's it called?" I said, "Strabane Grammar School." He says, "Oh, you'll be all right. It's Protestant." I was so naive. And so I came over for interview, and I was just blown away by how nice the people were. And I thought, this is a lovely place. And the school was lovely. So I accepted the job. I thought, 3 years. I'll do it for 3 years. That was in 1973. I retired from that school in 2013. I taught there for 40 years solid. Anyway, it was August, so the university wasn't back. And I went to the Students' Union, and there were a crowd of students there planning Freshers' Week. And I said, "Could you tell me about the Gay Society here? I've never experienced it. You know that thing where they say you could have heard a pin drop? Everybody went quiet. Then somebody said very, very, we don't talk about that sort of thing here. What the fuck? What's going on here? I was taken aside by this very nice man who turned out to be gay himself, and he explained that homosexuality was still illegal in Northern Ireland. I hadn't a clue. I assumed it was just the same as in England. And that really, you know, it was just a subject he didn't talk about.
I was very afraid to come home at that time. But it was either not, if I didn't come home, I was going to kill myself, because that is where my heart lay. And I did come home. Now, that phone call, that life, I tried to commit suicide 3 times while I was in Derry, and ended up in Grancha each time. It was a complete combination that just helped me all over again like a boat. I thought it was very unfair with the phone call. I thought it was very unfair being told to get out of my town, the town I love so well. Leave my family, my friends and all my associates. This was just no call for it. And to come to my years later on, there was many more like me. Now they could be dead now. They may never have been allowed back into Derry. I met some years ago in London and places, and they had been put out by the same organisations And most of them have died now in England and never come back.
This is Jemima. Jemima, the reason why I want Jemima and why she's a big part of my story is because Jemima was the first doll that I ever bought as Jennifer. Okay. Because before that, I had to hide. And I hid for 30 years. Okay. And when I played with dolls, my sister's dolls mostly, it was in secret, so nobody could see me. And that's why Jemima's so special, because I just felt that at last I could buy my doll, and it's not going to be my sister's doll, it's my doll. I come from a generation when, if you were transgender, you kept it quiet. When I was 4 years old, that's when I felt different. I just felt different to other little boys. But in those days, there was no such thing as even the word transgender. When I was 7, I realised that I was a girl. And by that time I was playing in secret with dolls and dressing in my sister's clothes because I was Jennifer. And I've always been Jennifer, from far back as I can remember, I was always Jennifer. If I'd have told my daddy that, well, Daddy, I think I'm a girl, or Daddy, I'm really a girl, he'd have told me, don't be stupid, shut up and get the coal in, and probably give me the belt, the pit belt. In those days, when I was 17, the treatment pathway for gender dysphoria, as we now call it, was aversion therapy and shock therapy, electric shock treatment. If that failed, then you might be put on a transition treatment pathway. And I was being tormented enough at 17. You know, I'd gone through an horrendous puberty because I thought that my body was betraying me. And at 17, I'm trying to do all the boy things, and it wasn't working, just not working. A lot of trans people, and especially trans people from my generation, we built a shell around us to protect us because we didn't want anybody to know who we really were. And my shell might have been a bit over masculine, because the more masculine there was, the less they would know about who I really was. And that's a shell that my partners saw. I went through 2 relationships, 2 marriages. I had 3 attempts at suicide because of gender dysphoria. Eventually, I came to the stage where I had to decide that I needed treatment. That was about 10 years ago. Okay. Interestingly, that's why I came to Derry. I came to Derry to transition, because whenever I came to Derry, I had friends that lived in Derry. Whenever I came to Derry, I always came as Jennifer, so no previous history. And so this shell that I built, which wasn't the true me, was what people saw. And it was what people said I should be. It wasn't who I should have been, myself. Anyway, I started my transition 10 years ago. I am now done and dusted, as we say. I don't consider myself to be a trans woman, really. I consider myself to be a female with transgender history. That's how I like to explain who I am. I ended up blagging my way into McGee. I did 4 years psychology, ended up with a master's in psychology. And my research area is trans issues. That's what I look at, because I think it's important. And it's important not for me, but for the ones that follow, the youngsters, because I don't want them to go through 30 years of crap that I went through. I don't want youngsters to not be able to go into a shop and buy a Jemima.
Unison was born on the 1st of July 1993, and it was a merger of 3 large UK-wide unions. National Association of Local Government Officers, known as NALGO, Confederation of Health Service Employees, known as COSE, and the National Union of Public Employees, NUPE. I worked for NUPE alongside Ines McCormick, and it was a union that had the distinction of being led by women, by feminists. And that, I think, was absolutely central in our view of the world, our view that any decent society had to be built within a framework of equality and human rights. And that meant standing up wherever we saw discrimination, victimisation, repression. Not an easy time.
Back then, if you talked about women's rights, you were strident. You were, upsetting everybody, and you were being ridiculous. And what about the poor men, And so if women then started talking about, within the women's movement and outside of, about lesbians and lesbian rights and the lesbian needing support and being, first of all, acknowledged and stop discrimination against them, and needing some resources to support them, because lesbian women growing up had very few role models back in those days, and they were pretty stereotyped and negative, and usually ended up in the woman being totally unhappy and, maybe killing herself, in the end. So women, it was so hidden. And so if lesbians spoke out, even within the women's movement, there was this, oh, you're going to rock the boat, you're going to make it worse, So speaking out as a lesbian or bisexual woman was a radical thing to do. And you didn't always get support, even from where you thought you should. And you got support sometimes where you wouldn't have expected it. So that's why allies were so important.
To me, a really important thing happened in Derry, and I think one of the most courageous things I ever saw in Derry, and that was when Mary Kay Mullen set up Bookworm Bookshop. And from the outset, she began to sell gay news, I think it was called, which was the main London-based gay newspaper.
We wanted feminist magazines and stuff and gay literature, and we couldn't get it. We couldn't even order spare room privately through the local APCK. The Association for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge, I think. It was the bookshop in Shipquay Street. And there were no other bookshops in Derry. There weren't even any second-hand bookshops in Derry back then. Derry was pretty run down in the mid-1970s. The city centre had been blowing up a lot. There were a lot of derelict buildings. A group of us, men and women, started thinking about a bookshop, setting up a radical alternative bookshop.
These were the centre of all sorts, and people began to congregate and meet each other and know about each other and so on and so forth. So those kinds of contacts led to the formation in Derry, and I can't remember exactly, but it must have been about 1980 or thereabouts, of Corafriend, a gay telephone befriending organisation. And I remember people just rang in that had maybe were gay but were frightened and fearful and didn't know what to do and all the rest of it.
A friend and I used to go around Foyle Street, where gay men were supposed to hang out, to sell gay community news in the evenings. That's how naive and how enthusiastic we were, because we thought people won't come in, because having gay community news on site, we learned that was also put people off, because if they were seen going in, they would be targeted as gay.
They allowed us to use a room upstairs in Bookworm for the telephone line, and then we moved to the Women's Centre, which was, I can't remember the name of the street. And then we moved to the Northland Centre, and we ended up in Clarendon Street.
I remember, the newspapers in Derry wouldn't take advertisements. They wouldn't accept money. Like the Derry Journal would not accept money for an ad for Corafriend. And you know, I think that was partially because of legal issues, but it was also partially because they were answerable, or thought they were answerable, to a very conservative readership. So those kinds of things. And I remember we used to, you know, when we couldn't get the information out about Corofin, so we used to go around with buckets of paste and posters in the dark at midnight, you know, and there was no one. The whole centre of the city was empty except, you know, the Corofin people with the buckets of paste and the soldiers. It was bizarre, but anyway, that was one of the ways of trying to get the information out. So there were very real fears. People had fears for that. You know, this was something utterly shocking and new to them themselves to discover that their nature was different to what, you know, other people. You know, the social disapproval of all of that, the religious disapproval, and then of course the police thing, and of course people were also open to blackmail. I myself, on 2 separate occasions, separated by 5 years, the RUC attempted to blackmail me because I was, if you like, gay, into becoming some sort of informer or whatever. It didn't work, apart from the fact that I was openly gay. So you couldn't blackmail me if I was openly gay. But nevertheless, they had to go. But so I mean, we can laugh at it now. It's hilarious in some ways. I mean, but that was very real for people.
In 1975, Jeff Dudgeon submitted a case to the European Court of Human Rights, saying that the anti-gay laws in Northern Ireland were discriminatory. After that, the police started a sort of a pogrom on the gay community. It was really scary. They were basically raiding gay men's houses, trying to get evidence that they were having sex. And eventually, it was like a ripple effect. They would get addresses and then raid somebody else's house, and then get more addresses and raid somebody else's house. And I mean, I got a phone call from Jeff saying, "Look, Stephen, your name and address is now on their database. Expect a call from the police," you know. So I was really shit scared then. It was pretty scary at the time. And they did eventually prepare a case against 4 men, 2 couples. And 3 of those 4 men were leaders of gay organisations in Northern Ireland. So it was a blatant attempt to shut gay rights down in Northern Ireland. It was disgusting. I was in a very strange situation. I was in a unionist school. My natural inclination would be pro-police. I'm a very law-abiding person generally, except when it came to having sex with men.
There were allies, you know, around too. The people who ran, you know, 45 Clarendon Street, you know, the Inner City Trust, you know, they were a great support, you know, places for meeting, a place for holding the first phone line and all too. Then the workers in Northland Centre and those who ran the Northland Centre at that time, you know, and then the Women's Centre, you know, all the women who ran the Women's Centre were involved in that. It meant that you felt like you were part of the community. When I worked in the community sector, it wasn't really unionised back then. It wasn't unionised. So I looked around for how I could feel supported in the unions. And one of the unions that attracted my attention was Unison with Ines McCormick. Ines I'd known from the civil rights days, and she was a great ally of us here in Derry. She would come and give talks and would support us and provide maybe funding too to support us with actions we had about women and work and stuff. So I joined Unison then.
We knew some of the lesbian scene from our women who'd become active in the Women's Committee and who'd introduced other women from the committee into that world. And I do remember one wonderful occasion when there was a major event up in Lower Crescent in Belfast, and it was a big production being put on by all the young lesbians, and we decided to bring our entire Women's Committee, which back then I think was about 40 odd strong, mostly middle-aged, mostly mums and grands. And along we brought them booked spots and brought them along for this particular session one evening up in Lower Crescent. And we caused hysteria among the young lesbians who said, my Auntie Mary's out there. What am I going to do? It was that kind of reaction. They found their relatives were the people we had brought along with us, as well as our own lesbian members. And I remember Ines McCormick. Ines and I worked together the whole way through this. She tapped one of our more senior women on the shoulder. School meals worker from Oma, who one day would become the president of the union. But she tapped her on the shoulder and she said, how do you feel about being here? Are you comfortable? And she said, well, the way I look at it, you know, they live in the shadows all the time. It's only right that I be part of their world for one night. And that was you know, a wonderful reaction. We knew exactly what she meant. And that core of lesbian activists were the key people who eventually would set up and make the LGBT group inside Unison actually work.
The late 70s, the 80s, this is also the time of ABBA and disco and so on. And gay men, for whatever, seem to be particularly addicted to discos. And one of the great demands was to have a gay disco. And I mean, again, it seems silly now, but in those days, that would have been one of the biggest things ever. And through the facility of the Students' Union at Magee College, and particularly the support of the student president then, Jerry O'Hara, gay discos were started in the Students' Union at Magee College. I have to say, very much against the wishes of the university authorities. They would have done anything to stop them, and all sorts of ruses were engaged in order to get but eventually the Students' Union delivered the gay discos, and they became the only gay facility, social facility, where people could go and feel safe, and that was really important.
A delegation arrived to see me one day, 3 guys, and they started explaining that the gay community was actually using a bar in John Street. It might have been called the Igloo. Vaguely, but the gay community was using this bar on a regular basis in John Street. That had become known, and some of them were being waylaid on the way home and beaten up, and there was a few incidents which were fairly serious, and it was obvious that there was people who were anti-gay who were actually targeting them, and that was the only social outlet they had. And they were saying that somebody had told them to come and see me and that I might be able to help. I don't know who. So I actually just said to them, I said, well, we have a hall here. If you want to have a disco here, I'll look after you. But I actually said to them, I said, why don't you, 2 of them were actually extracurricular students. And I said, why don't you get your student union cards and set up a gay society? So they started to organise. And then the provost of the site of Magee College sent for me, and he said, we're not going to have any gay societies on my campus. I don't want this campus to be known as a gay campus. So I said, well, this is a student union matter, and you shouldn't really be interfering. So we had a bit of a sort of legalistic argument about whether or not he could control the premises or the use of them, or whether I could control it. So I went back down to the office and I asked the secretary to do up a petition which said I hereby apply to be a member of the Magee Gay Society. And we got clipboards and we got leaflets printed with about 50 lines on each page. And I went down and grabbed a handful of friends of mine and colleagues who were there, and I said, right, go around and get them all signed. And we just went around every table and said, sign that. And people were saying, what is it? And we were saying, no, just sign it for God's sake. It's a society. So we had 220 signatures, on the petition. And I went back to the office and I got them photocopied, and I went back up to see the provost, and I said to him, you have the biggest gay society in Europe, and I says, I will send that to the Sunday papers if I get any more nonsense out of you. And he just put his hands in the air, says, look. So the lads organised the gay disco. I got a phone call from McGee, from the janitors, most of whom were quite elderly and ex-servicemen and not massively progressive in their thinking, God bless them. So they says, there's a crowd of people here, and I says, that's okay. And they were saying, but you know who they are? And I says, that's okay. And they were saying, well, so I said, look, wait there. So I drove up to McGee, and the guys hadn't lifted the barrier to let them in, so they were there with all the disco equipment and all the decorations and all the stuff. They had a couple of carloads. So I went up and said to the janitors, look, this is a student union operation, and you have to get out of the way. So they did. I think the disco was, I didn't hang around, the disco was very well attended, and they did it for years and years and years after it.
It was a lovely place to have a disco. People felt safe going there. You know, it was quiet, it was, you know, out of the way in a way, and it was very friendly and welcoming. It didn't have a bar. So, you know, and men and women went to it, and people came over from Coleraine to go to it as well, and from around, you know. So that was the one bright part of the scene then, you know.
The reason I moved to Derry was because I knew there was a gay disco happening every weekend, so I had actually worked in Desmond's factory in Omagh. So I got a transfer from Desmond's down to Springtown, got a wee flat in Carley Road. So went to the gay disco every Saturday night in McGee. It's the best thing ever. It's like meeting people that looked like you and were like you.
People talked about it. They would have saved all month to get a new outfit or do whatever just to go and meet people. And it was a really, really melting pot. It was an amazing place to be. You could be listening to like a real punk record, and then you could be listening to ABBA, or you could be listening to anything. It was a real collective of people. And I suppose the atmosphere was amazing. And it wasn't run for money. It wasn't corporate. It was just run for people to have a safe space and a safe environment.
I mean, I must have known about 3 young fellas who would have committed suicide, but they would have come in from Donegal. You know, they would have come in from rural areas in Donegal just to, you know, speak to people and have something to do. But obviously the pressure of that as well, living, you know, just over the border there, where again you're back into not having anything, not being able to come out because you couldn't come out. It just wasn't, you just couldn't. So that's where a lot of that would have stemmed from, when young people taking their own lives.
Of the 31 years I lived here, I had 29 of them with stones, eggs, anything they could throw at it, explosives in my postbox, which exploded, burnt the curtains, put the windows out, was offered other accommodation, but I wouldn't give up where I live now, because it's still only 500 yards from where I was born.
There can't have been a night that went past when there wasn't something thrown at the window, the door was kicked, there was homophobic shouts outside. It was horrible. And on several occasions in the mid-80s, the windows were actually broken with bricks or bottles coming through the window.
I mean, going out in Derry at night, you would kind of have to go out with groups of people because, you know, we all kind of stuck together. So a group of us would go out because you knew that somebody was going to be hit before you got home. You know, that could have been young men or young women or whatever. And, you know, so we did try and stay in groups and, you know, help each other out. And the only disco, we would have went to McGee Disco, you know, and we kept ourselves to ourselves. That sounds even terrible saying that. But you know what I mean? We went out to have a nice night on a Friday night and, you know, met our friends. And back then, the police wouldn't have been very good with everything that was happening. So it just was difficult all around. And they were didn't want their parents to find out that it was a homophobic attack because they probably weren't out. So there was just so much, that you had to deal with, you know.
There was just so much homophobia. Like the first job that I came to was in the unemployed centre. The person who would have been my immediate boss was, having a bit of a rant one day and started talking about shirt lifters. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, oh, is that not a term that you'd use, that you'd use down south? And I was like, well, if it's what I think you're saying, then it's a term nobody should be using, full stop. Like, this is supposed to be, this centre, is supposed to be about equality and all, and you're using homophobic slurs, what the going on, And like, basically I was told like to, stop getting my knickers in a twist and, calm down.
The British government was in control of Northern Ireland at that stage. There was no Stormont. And so they had this order in council in about, I think, 75 or 76 to bring the law here in line with the law in England. And they were worried that there wasn't much support for it in Northern Ireland. And in fact, the Unionist MPs were all totally against it. But they still tried to bring it in, and Ian Paisley and the DUP started this campaign called Save Ulster from Sodomy. And the idea was that they would go round and get a huge petition in from the people of Northern Ireland to say that they didn't want the law changing. And they also tried to get every council in the country to pass a motion against the law change. Well, when I heard this, I thought, well, I'm not having that. So I wrote a letter to every council member explaining why I thought that they shouldn't pass this motion. Now, in those days, you can't do emails or anything like that, so I wrote it, hand-wrote it, and photocopied it and sent it to every councillor in Strabane. The head called me in. One of the Board of Governors was a Unionist councillor, and she'd been in to see him. She hadn't been anti-gay. She just told him that I'd done this and that I needed to be aware that I could be in trouble because there would be people that would be against me. But actually nothing happened. Nothing happened at all. I don't know why Strabane Council, I don't think the vote was ever taken in Strabane Council. What happened was that Jeff's case at the European Court of Human Rights was accepted. It was ruled upon, and I think in 1981 or 1980, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the law in Northern Ireland was contrary to human rights. So the British government were compelled to change the law here. So in 1982, I think it was, the law changed and we got decriminalisation in Northern Ireland. And that was hugely important. For the first time, I wasn't a criminal, unless, of course, the other guy was under 21. Or we weren't in private, or we'd met through an advert, or etc., etc., etc.
We finally got in touch with Sean and David in Carfriend and said, we got to do something about this. We can't just let these attacks go on. And every time you turn on the radio or you open the journal, somebody else has been beaten up, because one of these days it'll just go too far. And we got to show that there's people in the city who think that's a disgrace and put it up to others, so the people who are kind of trying to look the other way and pretend it's not happening. Let's actually put it up to them as well. Let's actually organise something. And it was actually very funny because when we said, let's organise a march down Shipke Street, the pair of them were like, oh my God, we can't do that because, we'll get attacked. I mean, that was actually the view, is we'll get attacked. And then there was also, and this was actually a really important point and it hadn't occurred to me, they also said, and you expect people to walk down that street with you, and that's all right, you can go home, but they'll then be identified as being like a target for attack. So that actually hadn't occurred to us. So we were like, okay, well, what we got to do then is we got to make sure there's a big enough march that you can't be identifying people, and also that there's enough people who everybody knows is straight, that people who aren't out and who don't want to be out in a town where they might be beaten up for it, can walk in safety, because people will just say, oh, they're one of them lefties or something like that. So we knew then that we'd have to work really hard, that it couldn't just be something that we call, 1 week and do the next, which you could do these days. We knew that we were going to have to build up to it. So we did, and we did a lot of work going around, different groups, women's groups in particular, because there's always been a certain kind of solidarity between women's groups and LGBT groups, for the obvious reason that both groups are kind of penalised for their sexuality. So I think in the end we probably had about 100 or maybe even 120 people walking down Shipkey Street, which isn't bad, for the kind of first time out. At the time we'd have been, I was involved in a group called Women's Newsletter, and we used to organise International Women's Day marches, and we'd have been delighted with the number that was there for the International Women's Day march, the same year. It did seem to help. It actually did seem to help. Now, it might be that the work that we were doing around the march, to build for the march, might have sort of made the difference as well. But they did, because it was mainly men who were getting beaten up. The lads did afterwards say that there was a reduction, for a while anyway, in the homophobic attacks, and also just that people felt a bit safer because they realised that there was more condemnation of the attacks than maybe they'd realised, And also, I think it helped to open a conversation in the town to say, if this town is the birth of the civil rights movement, then it has to also take a lead in terms of the gay rights movement as well.
I was kind of struggling with my identity. I used to consider myself a trans man. At this stage, I kind of realised that I was non-binary. I had just gotten out of a really bad relationship and I was struggling mentally. I was stuck in an all-girls Catholic school, so that wasn't great either. And I wasn't out to my parents, I was only out to my friends and other people I knew were in the community. But yeah, within that year, my mental health has improved a lot. I've been speaking up a lot more, and I've come out to my parents. I've moved to a school where I'm openly trans, and they're great about it. Yeah, being a non-binary person, and with social media as great as it is, you're open to a lot of hatred and bigotry. People would say that I'm fake, that I'm mentally ill, that I don't exist. People are weirdly obsessed with what's in my trousers. Because, obviously, gender is based on genitals. But I used to hate myself a lot, and I really struggled with coming to terms with my identity, but I'm very proud to be different. I enjoy being this weird kind of gender rebel that some people would see me as. And yeah, I've learned to accept myself, and I'm very open about who I am. And although I've faced a lot of hatred for it, online and in school, and even just random people on the streets, I don't regret it, because, I don't know, I enjoy being able to be myself and be open about it. I'm just glad that I don't live like 30 years ago, where I would have been hidden on TV and where I would have faced the terrible attacks that other people have faced.
Car Friend was up and running, and it was providing a service of kind of at least bringing people into touch with each other. Of course, in the middle 80s, beginning of the 80s, and gay people across the world were hit by the AIDS crisis, the arrival of AIDS, and but this was a problem in all sorts of places. The illegality of homosexuality, all these things, it was contributing to the spread of AIDS and that. So, in fact, a very important development that happened in Derry, and I think in Derry ahead of elsewhere in the north, was that Stella Burnside, who people will know was very active and involved in the administration of the health service, she anyway helped to secure a grant from I think it was called the Western Health Board or something like that, on the basis of, if you like, education. Now, remember, homosexuality amongst men is still illegal, but the state anyway gave a grant, at least on that basis, that education would help to curtail the spread of AIDS. And that was a very important step. And as far as I remember, that happened in Derry before it happened in other parts of Northern Ireland.
First of all, we heard there was this disease. It was in America. Then we heard then it was coming to England. And we weren't aware of it in Derry. But we knew it happened. And we seen it on TV. And we seen all the ads. But we very much seen it as a gay man's plague. And nobody else would get it, only gay men. And I think then that was the first time, I suppose, I experienced maybe people in Derry talking negative about gay people and gay men in particular. That it was the way, where everything else always had been very hidden and very underground. People were expressing opinions then. This was the wrath of God, this was the other. And then that was very, very challenging to be gay and very frightening. Because you didn't want anybody to know, because people at that time, rightly or wrongly, were very concerned being around gay men. How could I catch AIDS? Would I catch AIDS if I sat beside somebody, shook hands with them? We all know now in hindsight, that's great. But at that time, people were very, very scared and very frightened. And young gay men were petrified. At that stage, I was working with Car Friend and Foyle Friend and Rainbow. And at that stage then, we were very much important to talk about getting out safe sex packs and educating our community and seeing what was the best way of moving forward and to make people aware and educate them. We had to educate our own community as well, because our own community wasn't aware of it. All that they knew was what they seen on TV. I suppose the media was very disruptive at that time, and very much disruptive to the gay community. They were saying statements that if you shook hands, or if you shared a toothbrush, or if you done this here, if you sat beside someone, people were afraid to use public toilets to go anywhere, or if people were staying with their friends or family, if they were known as gay, could they share the same cutlery? Could you share the same plate? And I think for us in Rainbow, at that stage when we were doing the safe sex packs, we were giving out precise information, what to avoid, what not to do, to get the test, to not get the test, what was safe sex and what was unsafe sex.
My first contact with gay men was the hysteria, the homophobia that was raging over AIDS. We had made demands inside the health service, for example, that the people who ran the service took this issue very seriously and commenced a set of training sessions with the staff to deal with the fact that there was hysteria and that gay men in particular were being labelled. And I just talked them through the kind of steps we were trying to take as a union to challenge homophobia. Those self-organised groups became absolutely critical in moving the union forward on the issue of equality and fighting discrimination and oppression and repression.
I think when AIDS came about, there was a great reflection by gay men especially. Yes, gay people might have come out, but they were going heading away then in a very short space of time. They weren't staying in their own hometown. They felt that they couldn't love their lifestyle. And at this stage we still didn't know anybody that was living with AIDS in Derry, but we knew that people had moved away and were living in London, etc., who were living with AIDS but wouldn't come back home because of the stigma. And also, I suppose they were concerned about the stigma around their family. Because was that a safe house to go into if there was somebody in there with HIV or AIDS?
Gradually, connections were made. Brian was very good. He was very proactive, you know, arranging meetings with clergy, with people in authority, you know, and the reputation of the phone line increased. And then we eventually got a whole new group of people in, James Grant, Andrew Muir, Tarlac O'Neill, Sean Moran, all these people then came in, and the phone line took off again, and we got funding for the first time. Good funding. James had great ideas of what we would be, and we were able to employ a full-time worker, etc., etc., etc.
There was people coming from Belfast, Donegal, everywhere to the disco because it was all got out there. So the society, I suppose, in the community became very lot stronger, and then we decided then we would get funding for our premises. So the premises came about then, and we then done like awareness and education. And then I suppose we started then looked upon our allies who always supported us. So that would have been anything from the women's movement to political parties, socialist parties. We always had great advocates and people like Eamon and Grady, the ASDLP, other political parties. So we thought then, right, we're going to do something. So I suppose that was the first time we thought maybe of doing Foyle Pride. And that was an amazing time.
There was more a public awareness of the need for support for gay people. Like the health agencies started to be more supportive and all. And so we actually organised a gay week or gay events once a year, you know, like for Pride. We first of all didn't go out on the streets or anything, but we organised events and talks.
The first couple of years of Foyle Pride was very, very basic and very homemade. We came together, it was like a competition for poetry, writing, somebody doing readings of gay authors and stuff like that there. It was very much about awareness and inviting along our friends to see a safe space. I think we had video nights, so there was no DVDs in those days. We had no money, we had no funding. It was just really somewhere to get a safe space, have a bit of fun, and a lot of it more community-based, not really corporate or not alcohol-based, but a meeting place. We had a religious service, and we had some sing-songs, stuff like that there.
One of the big breakthroughs was in 1993 when Annie Courtney, Mayor of Derry, she was an SDLP councillor, and she publicly launched Foyle Pride events for the week, you know, and that was amazing to have the Mayor of Derry supporting, you know, and after that I think that was a challenge to any other politicians, would they support us, you know, but it felt like we were coming in from the cold, you know, and being supported.
She was the first mayor of any city in Ireland to open a gay pride festival. Now, nowadays they're falling over each other to march in them. But I remember Annie telling me that it was so, if you like, new and innovative and maybe even slightly dangerous that she came to it in her official car, and she never told the driver where she was going. And she turned up in the official car to launch the gay pride, and the driver still didn't know where she. but that was hugely important, and you know, is to the credit, particularly the credit to Annie Courtney.
We had massive battles with the clergy, with the fundamentalist Christians. There was one particular guy, Ian Brown, Reverend Ian Brown, who was so vehemently homophobic it wasn't true. For one of the prides, he produced a leaflet. It was a statement against sodomy, and he was handing it around Derry, and it was basically claiming that we were paedophiles, that we were corrupting young people and all this crap. And I've got a lovely photograph of one of the early prides, I think it was 95, where everybody's standing outside the Tower Museum and all wearing rainbows and bright clothes and everything, but everybody's really happy looking. And then another photograph in the other direction of the demonstrators all in their dull clothes and looking sad and boring. And I mean, it was such a contrast.
One of our first members was Jim McShane, as everybody would know as Baltimore at Song Tarzan Boy. Jim had AIDS. Jim came back, and Jim found that really hard. He'd been all around the world. He'd been quite successful. He had a #1 hit in many, many countries around Europe. But again, he was living with AIDS, and he wanted to come back to be around his own family, his own friends, and the support of that. So that was challenging for Jim. But again, it was coming back to that safe haven of home, but also the challenge of what people would think. His health wasn't the best at that stage, but still wanted to be out there and still wanted to educate people. And that was part of the reason why Jim became involved in one of the first prides. So there's a lovely photograph of the first pride committee where Jim's part of that. So again, for us, for Foyle Pride, was very much about raising awareness and raising support for our people out there and for our friends and family.
I remember being, I'm going to say 8 because I think I was 5, but it couldn't be natural to be 5, so I think I was 8. I played for McGee and Culmore football team. We played for the same team. They were rolled into one because the numbers were so low. And I was the only young girl. There was a seniors and a juniors, but there was only a seniors girl team, so I played with the juniors boys. And we all went on a school trip, a football trip to Shrove Beach in the summer. And I remember being, so it was just me up the back with all the teenage girls. And I remember like I was sitting up the back and I was, I'm pure class. And I turned around and there was a girl in the football team who was in the seniors as well. She was only a couple of years older. Like, I'm going to call her Sharon because I always say her actual name, and I said it on Radio Foyle and I was pure Mordo in case she actually then like came forward. So Sharon, I turned around to one of the girls and I was all, do you know what, I actually think Sharon's really beautiful. I really fancy Sharon, because I had no idea that this was a thing that you probably shouldn't have said whenever you were 8, especially in a room or a bus full of teenagers. And then that whole day then it was just like ostracised, and she had a boyfriend and I was the wee young lesbian, and they all kept trying to push me on there to, you know, like a wee bus, and it was full of like rowdy teenagers. They kept trying to shove me down the corridor, the hall of the bus, trying to be all, go kiss her, go give her a hug, go give her a hug, give Sharon a hug, you're obsessed with Sharon, go give her a hug. And I was so mortified. But I couldn't understand why I felt so mortified, because I was only like 8 and I didn't realise that what I was feeling was any different, because I didn't know what I was feeling, because I was 8. And I'd never been exposed to anything, whether this was right or wrong. I just felt like this, Jesus, sometimes I like chicken for dinner on a Sunday. I fancy Sharon, like this is completely normal, do you know what I mean? Completely normal. Fast forward a few years later, I actually bumped into her in Pepe's, and she is gay and she is out, and she was going on my friend for a while, and I'm really happy that I dodged that bullet. So, but so what's really interesting is that is probably, and thankfully, the only time I've ever felt ostracised for who I was and who I fancied. But it's really scary to think that, like, I was 8. Do you know what I mean? And like, I didn't understand, and like, I shouldn't have felt like that. And them teenagers should have really been protecting me, because I was the youngest on the bus and I was the only young wee girl there. And I was clearly the only, I wasn't even out because I didn't know what gay was. But you know, like, there should have been a bubble to protect me. Or like, not to sound like entitled or anything, but like looking back when we were that age, you'd like to think that they were protecting. But seeing like the young people now, I don't think that thankfully would never happen. But I just thought that I love that story. I just think it's quite funny.
Gays, whether they were Catholic, Protestant, Unionist or Nationalist or whatever, all congregated together. And I'm not saying there was never anything said, but it was a community of people, and it was not in any sense riven by the rows and things that went on outside of it. And that, I think that was extraordinarily important. The only Protestant friends I really had were within the gay community. And that, I think that has to be said. And as far as I know, it was basically similar in Belfast as well.
I suppose growing up in Derry, growing up in Cairnhill, I had very little experience of anybody from another faith. Coming out into the gay world was completely different. I met people who I'd never have met. And again, I suppose I was coming from very much from a working class background. I was mixing them with people who were different lifestyles, different religions, different careers. People who were in Orange Lorders were bandsmen, which I would never dealt with. And then I suppose in those early days, even meeting people from across the water and other people coming here, it was just, it enlightened me to a lot more different cultures and different points of view that I think sometimes when you live in your own bubble, you only see and you only want to protect your own bubble. So I was listening to other people then, and they were the exact same views, the same opinions, and they were feeling the same harassment that I was feeling as a young Catholic boy. So the young Protestant boy from living in Nelson Drive in Londonderry was going through the exact same as me, but it was just, we were two different sides. So my introduction then to LGBT unison, as it was known then, was through Sean Moran, who worked in Foyle and Rainbow. Sean was then also a member of Unison LGBT. So I spoke to him, we went to several meetings. I became then quite active as well myself. Got really a lot of insight for what was happening there, and equality for all. So then I met a lot of other people, and then maybe about 5 years now, I'm the chair of Unison LGBT Plus Northern Ireland. So I represent them in national committee across the water. So that's from all the regions. Having that voice for LGBT plus people in Unison.
That's where we first met Sean Moran. Yeah, wonderful relationship with Sean, and Sean was so enthusiastic about embracing the union and what the union could do. His contribution was to speak out. He's very proud of his role inside Rainbow. He would invite people on a constant basis to come along and experience what they were trying to do and have the conversations. And he was a wonderful networker. And networks are the way. You know, if we're really going to build a world where equality and human rights frameworks are how decisions are taken, then we need massive networks.
Me being part of Unison LGBT Plus was very important that we got involved with love equality and the rights for equal marriage for Northern Ireland. So that's something we've been fighting for this last couple of years, and lobbying all the MPs in England, Scotland and Wales to support us. I think we're stronger together. That's one of our mottos in the union. So Unison's very proactive and supporting all LGBT plus people in the UK. The first 10, 15 years, Pride had no march. It was very organised, like in events, but we never thought, or never had the strength to maybe march. Then we decided, right, we're going to do a march, and we're going to march through the town. And I think there was a lot of fear in that, and a lot of, is Derry ready for this? Are we ready for this?
We had a few meetings in my house in 2009, and I was like, God, could we possibly have a parade? Like, could we possibly have a parade? But we decided that we would have a parade in the town. I had no idea what we were doing, no idea how to go about having this parade. Spoke to different people in the council, and eventually Colm Eastwood was the mayor at the time. So Colm said that he would pay for the stage and the sound in the Guildhall, because we had no money. We had absolutely no money. We were doing fundraisers and for a good 7-8 months beforehand. I remember putting the feelers out, seeing people, what do you think, would this work, would it not work? And don't do it. We'll be laughed out of the town, don't be doing it. And I suppose the thing that kept us marching forward was, I suppose we probably thought about ourselves when we were younger. There was nothing for us, and growing up there was no visibility even, when I was living in Derry or Roma or anything else. And it was the same for Wendy and all those other women involved, and that's why we, decided we have to do this now. It's just for the young people of the town, and it's just for people that didn't make it because there's suicide or whatever, the bullying. So there's all them factors that came into it. That we weren't just doing it for ourselves, we weren't doing it for a bit of crack on the day, we were doing it, to get people out onto the streets. I think we arrived at the train station, it must have been 6 o'clock in the morning, to get everything set up and all the barriers and all our props and flags and everything else. And the parade was taken off at 2 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock there was nobody there. There was a couple of camera people, I think the BBC were there, and the police were there, and there was us couple standing there, and the sweat pouring off us and going, oh my God, nobody's going to come. And we had the Christians on the other side of the road with their Bibles, and there was more of them than there was of us, and it was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. And then the next thing, people just started coming through the train station, and cars started arriving, and buses started arriving, and it was incredible seeing. I was like, oh my God, thank the good heavens that people have arrived, because I don't know what we would have done if they hadn't. I really don't know. But it was absolutely amazing, and the atmosphere was incredible. We had to borrow the rainbow flag from Dublin Pride. They lent us the rainbow flag. And we didn't think we would have enough people to carry it, because you needed about 100 people to carry it, so that was well sorted as well.
We had the political parties with the unions. My own union, Unison, was very productive in that, and other unions. And then the Socialist Party, Sinn Féin, SDLP, amazing. But what's funny looking back now, there wasn't a terrible lot of gay people in the march. It was more our allies, and gay people, yes, there was gay people on it, but at that stage they were still scared. And they were still frightened to walk down Shipley Street in Derry. Thankfully, and it's been amazing, each year we're getting more and more gay people. But again, the march is welcome to everybody, as long as they're not corporate. And I think that's why we've kept her very much community based. Very much a march for the gay community and led by the gay community.
I belong to the generation that was part of the small group of people who went out and tried to make Pride happen on the streets of Belfast, and others did so on the streets of Derry and then other towns. It was wonderful several years ago to be part of that enormous groundswell. And the union always plays a big role in the Pride marches. But it has become an issue of big concern to us. We had a debate about this within the union within the last couple of years, that Pride marches like the Belfast one are now heavily commercial. They're commercialised, and we see multinationals. Fair play to the workers who work for them, who are in the parade, and they're doing the right thing, and they're affirming their belief in equality and human rights. But we're looking at the names of some of these multinationals walking past who are anti-trade union, who won't recognise us, who have got very dubious roles in the supply chain around the world in terms of human rights and equality beyond these shores. And we have questions to ask about why something that ordinary people fought for in difficult circumstances should be essentially a pretty big, cheap way of advertising for them. We've got problems with that, and we're very proud of the fact that Derry has stood firm.
Families were coming out with their kids who probably couldn't have done that before, and their children who were gay, bringing them out onto the streets. And I mean, that would have been a huge thing, because you had 13, 14-year-old kids coming over to me going, God, I wouldn't have come out only for you. And you could see their mothers standing doing the same, and they'd be going, God, this is amazing, this is amazing. It was a mixture of gay men, women, trans people, people coming in from all different areas. Like there was people there we heard after from Manchester, you know, and it was amazing the amount of young people, young gay men and young gay women that were there, like talking 13, 14, 15, 16, and them as confident as anything. I would not have been out the door at that age. I just wouldn't, I couldn't have. And it was amazing seeing that and the confidence of them, you know, it was just incredible. But you just had people, you know, every type of people was there, you know, families, everybody. And the sun was out. It was amazing. It was like at the end of August, and we thought it was going to pour, but the sun had come out, and it was amazing. So we walked the whole way across Duke Street, and the reception we were getting was incredible. You know, there's people pumping the horns, going over Craigavon Bridge, and you could see that people were delighted that we were there, you know, and going up through Carlisle Road, people were coming out of the shops, they clap. And it was like, my God, this is unbelievable.
It's a very fun, colourful day for the city. And again, it's for the whole city. It's not for Catholics, it's not for Protestants, it's for all our community. As Derry's progressed, we're a lot more cultures here now, a lot more identities, and they're very welcome. We really embrace that. So it's a nice, warm, friendly day for everybody to promote equality. And I suppose from what we've learned in the Foyle Pride Committee is you can't have rights for yourself but rights for nobody else. So we've always been there for equality and looking out at that. And I think our allies, we help them, they help us. We raise awareness, and the whole thing is having a safe space for everybody and equality for everybody.
It's wonderful to see what's happening around us now, that primarily that people are not afraid to be gay. That's the fundamental thing, that, you know, that the social stigmas, the legal, you know, requirements and so on have all changed to the positive. I mean, sometimes having lived through my own life and seeing the very opposite, I'm sometimes slightly shocked, you know. It's slightly shocking that the Taoiseach is gay, and nobody gives a damn whether he is or he isn't. Or that the government will put money into gay projects. That it's nearly compulsory to be gay now. There's so many, you know, and that is wonderful. But I also, it would be wrong, if you like, from my perspective, to look back and not think of, God, all the damage that was done and the pain that was caused. And so, and, you know, there are still people alive who suffered a great deal from all of that.
I see the people in the town now, the guys with the colourful trousers, the no socks, the trousers halfway up the leg in a grey tan, using sunbeds, using men's cosmetics. Yeah, it has changed for the better, but you can't get rid that quickly of the old days and the thoughts that were in those people's heads.
When I retired in 2013, a lot of former pupils contacted me. Not gay pupils, straight pupils, to say what an influence I've been on them. Having an openly gay teacher open their eyes, and how they felt that they were able to go out with a much more open view of the world.
I came to Derry in 1975 and the women's movement, and I joined the women's movement in 1976, I had been away for a couple of years in the States in the early 70s, and I came back home and I felt, yes, I want to stay here and to make a difference and to make a change. I was glad to be back here, even though, you know, there was so much troubles were going on, you know, so much trouble, inequality, the war was going on, I haven't discovered feminism, you know, there was so much to be done. So I felt, no, this is my place. We have to stay here and change where we are. I was so impressed by the women of Derry and how they survived and were active and in just keeping lives going and heading out against discrimination, from the bin lids to the factory workers who came out on strike, and, you know, the women who supported their families and all, you know. I mean, there was a great feeling of, yes, we're in this together and let's work against it, you know.
I think that the fight for LGBTQ rights is actually a fight that strengthens the solidarity of our entire society, and particularly of the people who are given a hard time in our society. Like, I think that the success of every movement for rights strengthens every other movement for rights. So it's all the same fight.
Yeah, I remember after the first, when the parade was over and getting up the next morning, and I swore to myself I would never do it again. I thought that was just so stressful and I think it took a long time to realise what we'd actually done, because people were going, you've made history in Derry. And, you know, I never really thought about it, and it actually took years after that to think, God, we really did something big in Derry. And, you know, and it was quite incredible, and I'm really lucky to have been a part of it, and I'm really glad to say too that it was organised by a crowd of women. I think it's really important to say that.
I actually think that there's far more progressive thinking about, and it's actually fascinating that, and I go to the Gay Pride Festival, and I'm actually, you know, really heartened to see gay people strutting their stuff with absolutely no apology. And that's the way it should be. You know, they're a part of this community, they're a fully fledged, equal part of this community. And it does your heart good to see them celebrating at the Pride Festival.
I had a lot of challenges, and there's been a lot of goals reached that I thought never would happen in my lifetime. I never thought that two men would be able to get married, or two women. I never thought there'd be equality in legal terms and employment and stuff like that there. But I also feel as well now too, we're still very much at the start of our journey. We look at our trans right, we look at all the other different rights that we still have to achieve. And again, as being part of Foyle Pride and part of Unison, we highlight those all the time. We live in the UK, yes, but there's other parts of this world where it's still very, very challenging and illegal, or even maybe with death, if you're part of the LGBT plus community. So I think we have to fight for those people having the voice. As when we didn't have the voice in Derry, when our allies come out in Derry for us, from the unions and from the political parties and the socialists, we have to now do that for the people around the world and highlight that for them so they have a better society in the future.